Recently, I had someone send me information regarding a case that was investigated by David Paulides of the Missing 411. I want to thank that person for sending this, by the way. And we have discussed the Missing 411 before. But there are a couple of things I want to discuss that have been on my mind that I would like to address here. I'm sure there are hunters, hikers, campers who watch this show, and I know that those people have a pretty decent understanding of the rules to venturing out in the woods or forest. Some more than others, right? Now, the laws governing your local forest, if you live in the U.S., those laws may vary by state. Outside the U.S., by country or region, right? But there are federal agency laws, aren't there, governing national parks. But these laws are not really a concern of most hunters, campers, or hikers. I mean, it's not like when you go out there, there are cameras and forest police everywhere. I mean, the park authorities want to know where you are when you go out there, but they are not physically monitoring you, right? There is no one out there watching your every move. Or is there? Which leads me to my second thought. And I know this is a question that has been on the minds of many, and that is, what entity is involved with maybe not every missing 411 case, but many of them, if not most of them? What are we dealing with here? Well, I may have an answer to that, but of course, the answer will be in the form of a theory, based on the information that I have gathered. You see, there are things out there in the universe, and things right here in our very own planet, that are not widely known to us. But yet these things have existed, probably as long as we have, if not longer. And no, I'm not talking about fallen angels. I'm not talking about demons. I'm not talking about aliens. I'm talking about cryptic humans. The wild man. So this comes from the Canberra Times, Wednesday, July 6th, 1955. A short article. 2-year-old Ida Mae Curtis missing overnight. Arid feared to have been the victim of a prowling bear. Was found yesterday in a small hole, only 30 yards from the Montana lumber camp from which she vanished on Sunday. She was discovered safe and sound, apart from minor cuts and bruises, beneath a cedar tree near a small stream in the rugged Cabinet Mountains. After hundreds of searchers, plagued by heavy rains and threats of snow, had scoured mountain trails so heavily covered with underbrush that they could only cover 1,000 feet in 6 hours. The child, taken to Libby Hospital, showed no internal injuries such as she might have suffered had she been mauled by a bear. Ida is too young to talk, so the full story of what happened to her in a night of near freezing point temperature may never be known. The search for the child was touched off when the mother, Mrs. M.E. Curtis, mother of 8, was quoted as saying that other children at a lumber camp 17 miles south of Libby had told her a bear had lumbered into the Curtis tent, picked up Ida with one paw, and then headed back into the woods on 3 legs. As the story spread, sources of armed volunteers set off in driving rain to hunt the bear. But American Associated Press said last night there was no indication that a bear played any part in the child's disappearance. A lumber worker, John Horn, said it seemed certain the child just wandered away, and then everybody got excited because bears had been seen around there. Now, there was a video published on Can-Am Missing Project with David Paulides going over the findings of a researcher of his books and the cases in them. And you can take a look at that video yourself. I'll link it below. In this video, David explains how the little girl's father worked in the Lee Creek logging camp. And one weekend, all the families were invited to visit the camp and stay there with their father. Once things go down and Ida goes missing and then is found, the sheriff continues to question the families because he doesn't believe what they told him about a bear kidnapping the girl, running off and sheltering the girl overnight. She was found dry, by the way, and shoes were cleaned up. These things like shoes, what is that? So many of these cases, we often tend to hear about the shoes of the victim. What is this shoe fetish these beings have with us anyway? I have a question for you guys because maybe some of you know a bit more about bears than I do. You guys have seen a bear's paw, right? Okay. I've seen bears carry logs over their shoulder, cubs on the back, fish in the mouth. I've seen how they grab onto things. Tell me when you have ever in your life ever even heard of a bear grabbing a child with one paw, running into the forest with the kid, tucked in its arm like a football player, takes the kid to its personal territory or shelter, babysitting the kid overnight, only God knows what the thing fed the child, then shines the kid's shoes and leaves. Is this normal bear behavior? Now, primates will do this. Primates will kidnap kids. I'm not really sure why some species of monkey behave that way, but it happens. So you see that on a primal level, that these beings have some sort of need to act out this behavior. Either to mimic human behavior, perhaps there is some type of envy, some type of need to nurture, because Ida Mae, after growing up, does remember the being that took her having large breasts. Does that sound like a bear to you guys? What does that sound like? I want to get into some of the National Park Service laws, policies, and regulations. For example, David Paulides mentions how the National Park Service requires you to apply for a permit to film in these parks. Now, recently a judge ruled it to be unconstitutional. Basically, personal cameras, cell phones, things like that, no problem. But if you have to bring a film crew in, then you need to apply for a permit. So he was right about that, but not necessarily the parts of the park that are generally open to the public. They have even stricter rules if you go into the wilderness, where you can only have something like a cell phone or photographer's camera. According to the Park Service, this is all for the security and preservation of the park and its wildlife. Some of the laws they have on the books maybe seem a bit silly or weird, like pocketing rocks or plants, because we all know that if they didn't have that law, we would have all these people taking all the rocks for themselves, leaving all the animals rockless. Everybody would have antlers and grass in their houses. We get it, right? No stealing the forest decor. There's not enough dead animal carcasses lying around. It doesn't look natural. You know, I'm not sure many people care about those laws. And they have laws that you wouldn't think would be laws. For example, it is prohibited to shortcut trails. You can't go off trail, not even to shortcut through some trees to get to the other part of the trail faster. Nope. There's noise laws in the forest. They don't want you to disturb the animals. I mean, it's not a zoo. It's the wilderness. That's why we call it the wild. It's a place where wild things are. But we can't be wild in the wild. So you can't go into a national park and play loud music because it disturbs whatever is trying to eat you. There are no drones. You can't fly drones. It disturbs the animals and people don't like it. You can't use metal detectors, magnetometers, sonar, sub-bottom profilers, or any other metal detecting device. And in some cases, just having something like that in your possession can get you hit with a felony. But these are in certain places in the national park, such as locations that have historical, archaeological significance. Some locations are designated holy burial grounds. For the most part, these laws are not really a concern for you and I. Of course, there is no littering, washing items in lakes. You can't just leave your camp unattended. Many of the basic camper rules, right? However, there are minor details in some of these laws that seem to, yes, be unconstitutional and overstepping. Then you have restricted areas, right? Where no one can, even though those restricted areas don't matter when it comes to the missing 411, because it's not like restricted areas are a common denominator for missing people, or sighting aliens, or Bigfoot. However, there seems to be a very large amount of these areas across the U.S. And I think restricted areas is something we should probably look into for another presentation. Which brings me back to the wild man. So folks, every time we come back to this subject about some wild beast man in the forest, it doesn't matter what country it's from, whether it's Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the Yeti, the Leshy, satyr or fawn, whether it's werewolves or that beast man Enkidu from the Epic of Gilgamesh or somebody's lost uncle. Cultures around the world have these stories from ancient times up until today. Now, wouldn't you say that's a cause for investigation? Especially when people keep going missing in ways that would point to such a thing. I did a presentation recently on the veil, and this is a good example of what I mean when I'm talking about the veil. In the world, there are what we consider spiritual boundaries. If you go into a church, people consider a church to be a spiritual boundary. Drawing a circle on the floor with a star in it, some people consider that to be a spiritual boundary. A cemetery or graveyard, an Indian burial ground or holy ground. Hanging up bones in the trees, there are spiritual boundaries, right? Some of those boundaries, I would say, are put in place by God. Remember what I said some time ago about God having the power to hold things back away from us? Now, what if I told you that God does this with creatures, certain creatures? And if I told you that these creatures are human, but not human like you and I, a different species of human. Not a different race of human, a different species, like there are different species of monkeys and apes. They're kind of similar, but they are not the same, right? Different species. Understand, we have bits and pieces of stories from around the world. These creatures seem to be hidden tribes. And a curse also seems to play a role in this. How these beings came to be, I would imagine it would have something to do with witchcraft, and fallen angels. And somehow you end up with a cursed beast man. I mean, it is basically the story of the werewolf. Is the wild man an attempt by the devil to mimic God's creation? Because the devil always tries to copy what God does. And trust me, if these wild men are the creation of a fallen being, they would probably have access to fallen angel technology, or maybe even guardianship. And if God didn't destroy them, I imagine he would forbidden them to leave certain areas. But what will be the conditions to allow these beastmen to interact with us, or our children, for that matter? A lot of people are never found. What happened to them? I am convinced there are some type of physical beings out there, wild men, right alongside beings that are more metaphysical. There is more to come. Be sure to visit woodwardentertainment.com and the Woodward Entertainment store. You can follow me on Instagram at jwoodward. There are several discussions I want to get through this week, so stay tuned. And as always, stay awake, stay aware, stay safe, and I'll talk to you all soon.